Hi guys, Dean McKendry here from Sentient Archery with another video lesson. So we've talked about modern recurve equipment in a list format, taking you through all the different items that you might want or need in an archery kit. I've done that video, please go check it out if you haven't seen it. I then went into bow styles, so the differences between the bow styles, specifically talking about modern recurve equipment. And so now we're going to move on to a series of videos specifically talking about choosing the right equipment for you. So there's a lot of considerations and there's obviously a lot of pieces of equipment. So what we're going to do is we're going to start specifically with the bow, the riser, the limbs, the string, and then I'm going to work outwards from there onto accessories that fit to the equipment, and then of course your shooting gear and your bags and so on. And then we'll obviously get onto actually once you have that, what do you do with it? So the first part in that series is going to be talking about the differences between training bows, club bows, and actual modern recurve equipment. So specifically talking about the riser and the limbs. So let's just get into that then. Okay, so the first thing is that the reason why they call them club and training bows is because that's more than likely where you're going to find them. You're going to find them at clubs or at a training system, and it's very likely what you might learn on. Some people skip that step and go straight to modern equipment. So I suppose that's going to be the topic, and the question we're going to answer is, why would you choose a club or a training bow, or why would you choose a modern recurve bow? Okay, so fundamentally, the difference really comes down to functionality. So I'm just going to show you, I've got a plastic polymer training bow here, and so you'll see quite a lot of these around. And then I've got fundamentally the same thing, but just made out of wood. So these training bows are pretty simple in that they don't have a lot of added extras, adjustability, little fittings for extra stabilizers. They're quite rudimentary by design. So looking at a more modern recurve riser, one of the main differences between them is that usually these club bows only have a single stabilizer pushing fitting position, whereas you can see on this one I've got possibility to add weight and stabilization here. I can put here, I can actually fit on the back of the handle underneath the grip, I can put up here up at the top of the limb. I've got spots over here inside the limb pocket to add weight if I want to, and even below the handle over here on the inside I can put weight there as well. So that's one of the big things, whereas we will see with these bows literally only has that one spot there. Now if you're just using a single stabilizer or single stabilizer rod, it's not a problem at all, but that again is the first, that's the first big difference. Okay, then looking at limb fit and limb adjustability, there's quite a big difference in how these bows work. So with these bows, how the limbs go into the riser is very simple. It just slots in and you have a single bolt that goes right through the limb and screws into the riser. You obviously have that on both sides. Now, it's a very secure system, so once you put it in, it's not going to go anywhere, but it is very lacking in adjustability. Once that limb's in, that's how it fits. You can't change it, you can't adjust it, you can't do anything to it. So, whereas with your modern recurve equipment, let's take a quick look here, the limbs work very differently. They actually just clip in. So it's a very simple, easy mechanism to get the limb in and out. And then you have a few planes of adjustment on these. So the first being that this limb bolt that goes past the limb and into the riser, that limb bolt can be adjusted inwards and outwards. You've got a limited range there, and that can effectively push the limb a little bit further back or forward, and you have then effectively an adjustment in the poundage of the limb. So if you crank that down, the limb is then going to have to flex more to get to your draw length, so you effectively increase the poundage. Now, where that's important is that it's also about adjusting the ratio between the top and the bottom. So you might find that your one limb is firing a little bit faster than the other, so you can be able to tweak that between the top and the bottom limb to get the limbs to fire at the right time, so to draw back at the same time and fire at the same time. That is called tiller adjustment. So club bows, no tiller adjustment. Obviously here we can use that adjustment for tiller, and you can also use it for increasing and decreasing of poundage for tuning. You don't have a huge range, you've got probably about 10%, but you can adjust 2, 3, maybe 4 pounds depending on the limbs through that range. So that's a very useful thing to do for tuning, and adjustment of the bow. Okay. The next thing is that you have limb alignment adjustments. Now what that basically means is that the limb, once it's in the riser like that, you can adjust slightly, not a huge adjustment, but you can adjust the limb in this plane. So it usually has a adjustment piece here. This riser works a little bit differently to most in that the left-right adjustment is actually on the tiller bolt. So this is your center pivot point and adjusts like that. Most though, the center point is actually with the limb bolt and it adjusts left-right. It doesn't really matter, the functionality is the same, but what that does is it allows you to get the limbs in the riser in perfect alignment. Even the best quality risers are close to impossible to get perfectly manufactured. So you need a little bit of adjustment there, especially if you're mixing and matching between brands of limbs and maybe the quality of your limbs is not perfect. You need to be able to adjust so that you can make sure that your top limb, bottom limb and riser all sit in a perfect line. So limb alignment is what that's called. And again, the club bows don't have that adjustment. Some flagship risers like the top Hoyt risers actually have another plane of adjustment where they can actually adjust the limb in this plane. And so that's just another factor to keep in mind. This bow can't do that, but it is just another adjustability element that some of the modern recurve bows have. Okay, so obviously materials is another big factor. These bows are made of plastic and wood, so they're a lot lighter, whereas your modern recurve equipment is generally made from aluminium or carbon fiber. So there's a little bit more mass, but there's a lot more rigidity. They can handle higher poundages and just overall going to be manufactured at a lot more accurately. Okay, they can handle a lot more force, they can handle a lot more poundage, a lot more energy going through them, and so you cannot shoot a club bow with any kind of heavy poundage. Okay, the other thing is that the grips, this piece over here, the handle where your hand goes, on modern recurve equipment that is removable and you can chop and change between different profiles and different sizes, so different finishes, so that's obviously a huge advantage as well. So whereas again, like your training bows, they don't have any of that. You basically got the handle built into the frame of the riser, and unless you're willing to actually build up and add material to that, you're not going to be able to adjust the profile of your grip. Okay. The other thing is other little accessories, or other fittings. So you can see over here, I've got a little tube extending past here. This is a clicker plate. So if you're shooting with a paddle clicker, that's going to be from here. That's going to have to click against that. The club bows don't have that. So you will have to have the clicker actually clicking against the riser over here. You can't have that adjustability, which is a big downside. And then in fact, most of the club bows don't have a threaded insert where you can actually attach that clicker. So either you have to have a stick-on one, or you'd have to have one that fits behind the sight block that then comes around. So that just becomes a little bit clunky and a little bit ineffective. The simplest really is to use just a simple paddle clicker. So sometimes they have a single threaded hole, sometimes they have two for even more adjustability to move that up and down. But yeah, that's another big consideration or big difference between your modern risers and your club training type risers. Okay, so another difference is that the modern recurve bows generally have two open threaded holes in the side of the riser for the pressure button. Now, the pressure button, generally speaking, would go in the back hole, but you can, for tuning purposes, move it to the front one. But more importantly than that is that if you were to use what we call a wraparound arrow rest, which is a plate that sits across here and then goes around to the other side, you would use the pressure button in one of those holes, and then you would need to use a bolt that goes into the other one to secure that arrow rest against the riser. Again, your club bows only have one of these, so you can use them with a pressure button, but you won't be able to use a wraparound, and you have no adjustability in terms of the positioning of your pressure button. Okay, so now you have a pretty good understanding of the differences between a club bow and a modern recurve bow. Now we're going to answer the question, why would you choose one or the other, or which one is a better option for you? Now, in terms of performance, nothing beats a modern recurve bow. There's a reason why they have all of these added features and adjustability, and that's all to increase the accuracy and the performance of the bow. So your club bows are never going to be able to outperform a modern bow. Okay, but there might be some reasons for you to not go for the modern equipment and go more for a training bow. One of those is going to be that maybe you're just starting out. If you're brand new to the sport, it is not necessary to spend a lot of money and get the modern recurve equipment with all of that adjustability and performance. You can learn the fundamentals very effectively on much more rudimentary equipment. So if you were to come to one of our clubs or our training systems, that's what you're going to learn on. And some of the guys shoot 3, 6, maybe even a year, 3 or 6 months, maybe even a year on club bows, and they do very well and perform quite well. Obviously, when you're wanting to then buy your own equipment, we then recommend getting modern recurve equipment. So if you have been shooting on a club bow for 3 months, 6 months, maybe a bit longer, there's no point going and buying your own club bow. It really does make sense to try and upgrade that and get onto modern recurve equipment. Now, there are actually some reasons why we would not do that though, and that's going to go down to your strength. So our youngsters and our particularly weak students, we're going to then recommend actually stick to a club bow, something that you know you can handle. So the reason for that is that the modern equipment is generally quite a lot heavier than your club bows. So your plastic and wooden risers are always going to be a lot lighter than a machined aluminium riser. And there's advantages again to that mass. That mass is good for stability and performance, but if you can't handle that weight, it's not going to be able to shoot for you. So you're going to generally pick up bad habits. You might find that you're not able to shoot as many arrows accurately. So there are definite advantages to shooting a much lighter bow. I've seen time and time again people being outperformed, even though they got all the fancy equipment, being outperformed by people with club bows simply because they can handle the equipment and shoot it a lot better. So not being overbowed by physical weight and poundage is an important factor. So you need to keep that in mind. Sometimes it really is better to just go for the cheaper, lighter equipment. Okay. Another factor that would maybe push you more towards a club or training bow setup is if you were severely budget restricted. So if you just cannot afford to get modern equipment, it's better to get something that you can continue shooting with and keep progressing with rather than not having a bow at all. But if that isn't a factor, so if you're strong enough and if you can afford it, there really is no other choice. Modern recurve equipment is a way better option. It's going to have a longer lifespan, it's going to perform better, and it's going to obviously have all of that adjustability and tuning functionality that you just don't get with a club bow. So generally speaking, it is going to be the best option to go for is to just get yourself modern recurve equipment. Now, of course, like I said, if you're a youngster, so young or weak or budget restricted, club bow will do the trick. So don't be scared to buy one of those. You can do very well and learn on one, but when you can and if you can, get yourself onto modern equipment. It's just a lot better to shoot. It's a lot more enjoyable, and your performance overall will be better with modern recurve equipment. Okay, so I think I've covered everything that I wanted to for that video. In the next video, I'm going to talk more specifically about which riser and limbs you actually want to go for in terms of brand and specification, but we'll get onto that in the next video. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Please, if you've gotten this far, subscribe, like the video, maybe share it with somebody. Obviously, that just helps us build the channel, get more people involved and more people subscribed, so we can actually just help more people get into the sport of archery and grow our community. So thank you so much, guys, and we'll check you next week.